Am I going crazy or is God just testing me? That has been a question that's been prevalent in my life a lot. Actually, just recently, if you watched my video yesterday, I out and out admitted that I didn't want to be there for one. And it was just like one of the days when just you wake up rough, I guess, around the edges, right? And you can have seasons of that, and I can start questioning things during those seasons where I'm like, am I losing my mind here? Or is there a problem in the sequence of behaviors and actions that I'm doing myself? Is God just testing me? Am I under the attack of the enemy? All these questions come up in my head all the time. And it's really depressing, actually. Um, and it's challenging. I don't even have anything written down for today at all. So you guys are going to get it completely off the top of my head. I didn't know whether I was going to stay in chapter 21 or 22 from Abraham, but today this is the story where God calls him to sacrifice his son, which is the focal point and the foundation of the promise that he gave Abraham initially. And therefore, I've started reading it. I just started laughing because yesterday was really rough for me. Like, even when I went to lead class at church, one of the helpers there came up to me. She's like the person that like organizes the curriculum, kind of, not the curriculum, but the people, the staff, to make sure everyone's where they are. And she came up and talked to me, and I was just straight up. I was like, she asked me how I was doing, and I was like, I'm all right today. I'm a very transparent person, and I was like, to be completely honest, I don't want to be here, but I know how I feel right now isn't gonna stop if I am not here, right? And I'm helping the church by being here and helping, God's kingdom by being here. I'm just going through the actions regardless how I feel, because I know this is probably like the best case for me, regardless, because the feelings got probably going to persist even if I'm not in this environment. And I don't allow like feelings to dictate my actions. I try not to, which, as I was saying yesterday, is a slippery slope, because sometimes when you start asking yourself these questions, is God just testing me, or am I going insane? Is there something wrong with me? Or am I, in a season of testing? Or God could be calling you to pull out of something when you think it's just your feelings telling you that, hey, this is really hard. But you think about your faith and you're like, well, if I would just push through this, this is just a test, when really God's trying to pull you out of it. And so when I started reading the chapter 22 today, seeing what chapter it was, which is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, I was like, God, you're funny, because like I'm literally going through that now. So we'll start today at Genesis chapter 22. And the top of it says Abraham tested in the Bible Gateway app. And there's been so many times where, and this will happen if you become self-critical and self-analytical, is you can start becoming obsessive with the patterns that are shown in, say, your daily journal or whatnot, which I have before, because there's a pattern that happens in my life wherein, and I don't know if it's abnormal or not really. I think it's probably falls into the category of normalcy, but I have like weeks where I'm really good, and then I'll just like have one weekend where I crash. But it's happened so many times that it's a pattern, and I've talked about it before on here. And so someone like me makes me wonder, is something wrong? Or am I right where God wants me to be? And I love how that's displayed in this chapter here, that question. So starting at verse 1, chapter 22, it says, "Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, 'Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied." And you got to imagine, this is right after Abraham had his son, the son that God promised him, the seed that will be the seed that will grow the nations, right? That Abraham was promised to be the father of all nations. God says, "Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, 'Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied. Then God said, 'Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about.' Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place that God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, 'Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you.' Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, 'Father?' 'Yes, my son,' Abraham replied. 'The fire and wood are here,' Isaac said, 'but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?' Abraham answered, 'God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son.' And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, 'Abraham, Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied. 'Do not lay a hand on the boy,' he said. 'Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son.' Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, 'The Lord will provide.' And to this day it is said, 'On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided.' The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, 'I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me.' Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba. And then it says, sometime later, Abraham was told, 'Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz the firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel, Kesed.'" And then he goes through a bunch of names. And that part is just called Nahor's son. So that's not really, that is important, but pertaining to this story here, I'll just leave off. I'll just read the last verse again. Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. And that's obviously like that's incredible to think about. That you've been waiting so long for a promise to come true. And Abraham's living in promise now, right? In some sense, he's living in promise. He just had his wife, who was beyond the humanistic and earthly standards in understanding, bear a child. She's way beyond the age of having childbirth, right? And God makes that miracle happen. And now the boy is, I don't know how exactly old he is, but old enough to build a relationship with Abraham, right? And not only have a relationship between a father and son, but this is probably even, there's more tethers between them created just because. Think about if the son you had or daughter you had, God spoke to you directly and was like, this daughter or son is going to be the seed. Like, this is the start of you being the father of all nations. Think about how you would view that kid. Think about the relationship and the value you would put on it. And then God tells Abraham, he's like, hey, I want you to take your son, your only son, Isaac, which that's interesting. I just noticed that. He says, take your son, your only son, Isaac. So that means Ishmael, God wasn't really saying Ishmael was his son. That is what it says. God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. And we talked yesterday about how Hagar had Ishmael and God took care of him anyway. So they were outside of the promise. And that seemed like trying to bring about a divine promise by human effort, earthly effort, I would say, or trying to bring about divine promise through earthly means and earthly understanding. Because we still have to bring about divine promises. God will ask us to do stuff, just like he's asking Abraham here to sacrifice Isaac. And it takes, faith without works is dead. So it does take human effort. But usually we have to operate out of the foundational knowledge bases that are built by the divine, and they won't make sense and they won't fall in the parameters of our understanding. And that's why I titled this video, Am I Going Crazy or Is God Testing Me? Because a lot of the times in my life, I still ask, like now, am I supposed to be doing X, Y, or Z? Or am I just like nuts? Is it okay that I'm feeling down today by doing this? Or is this a pattern and I need to like look into it heavily? Have I been messing up this whole time? And it's so wild for me to think that Abraham had this relationship with his son, and God's like, take your son, your only son, Isaac. He didn't have to say your only son, right? He didn't have to. So this chapter being called Abraham Tested, like God indicating to Abraham that that's his only son. Just that interaction, think about that. The God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, is telling you, your only son. So when Abraham is called to sacrifice his son, he probably starts thinking in his head all these things. And the fact that God just titled that kid as his only son would make it so much worse. Right? It really would. Because you're going to be thinking that 100%. You're going to be like, this is my only kid, my only, like, the other kid was brought about through a mistake. And this is the seed that's going to be planted, wherein I'm going to be the father of all nations. This is the seed this is the divine seed, right? You could look at Ishmael as something that God didn't intend or want necessarily, perhaps, but he still blessed it because he loved Abraham and he loves us as people. And he looked out for it still. But Isaac is the one that God foreseen was going to bring about the genetic pathway to Abraham being the father of all nations. And for him to just ask Abraham right away, will you sacrifice this kid? Go sacrifice him, kill him. And when I think about the things that God has called me to do in my life, like my job now as a software developer, I love my job. And there's things about it that at times, obviously frustrate me and whatnot, but I'm eternally grateful for my job. And in order to get to where I am now, I had to quit my previous job and be unemployed for a few months, go on the job hunt with nothing there to sustain me in my future representation of where I was. And what I mean by that is I couldn't look 3 months down the road and be like, okay, I'm going to be able to pay for X, Y, and Z. I don't have a job. I totally had to do that on faith. And my parents totally backed me on it. Like, I'm so grateful for them that God gave me them because they took out some money that they didn't really have because they believed in what I said when I was like, God wants me to leave this place for something else. And that is literally an example of you sacrificing something for something greater. And it really wasn't entirely a sacrifice because when I left, me getting a job at my previous company anyway was kind of a hand of God thing anyway because I only had a 2-year. I went to this first annual program where the company was taking interns from all across the country and putting them in this program. And then they'd end up with a permanent job. And I was like, I'll do that if you keep me in the same department for all 3 rotations because it was supposed to be like a rotational thing. Anyway, what I'm stating is all these things lined up for me to get a job straight out of college with just a 2-year, which made up for time that I changed my majors a billion times. Like my first major was going to be psychology. And then it ended up being programming. But at that time I was 25, 27 or something like that. And God made up for all that time. And so it seemed like God did all of these things to get me to this place. And then I felt like God was calling me to leave, which didn't make sense. It's like, dude, you did all these things so I would get here. And now you want me to leave when things are getting weird or tough? It seems paradoxical, and it seems doesn't make sense. It almost makes me feel hypocritical at times too when that happens because we're supposed to endure suffering to learn obedience. And I have a big problem of enduring suffering that maybe God doesn't want me to endure because that's how I'm built and that's how he's made me. So I can sit and suffer in something in another place for far too long when God wanted me to move from there. And there's sometimes just being honest with you, it's just like, am I losing my damn mind? you know? Because like I was saying in the beginning, I can start to pick up on patterns when things start getting hard. And then I start feeling a certain way. And then I have to analyze my thought pattern. And it's also a blessing and a curse that I'm so passionate about psychology and I read so much text on it and whatnot. And so much subject material with it, and I study it just for fun. And knowing a lot about something can sometimes be a factor in supplementing your negative thoughts about you struggling in that area that you're knowledgeable in, right? It's just like, say, for example, if you were a great leader and you've taken tons of courses on being a leader, and then your whole team ends up not liking you, or um, we'll say the vast majority has a problem with something you did, and it's a repeating pattern. And you could think, well, I'm a leader and I've taken so much on leadership. I've learned so much about it. I have this huge foundational knowledge. I have this huge foundation of knowledge on how to be a leader, and I've done great so far. So why am I struggling here? And then when you struggle in those areas that you know a lot about, it can make you feel more lost, because if you have searched an entire area, every nook and cranny for something, and you feel like you've quote unquote gotten pretty good at it or mastered it, when you have a problem there, it'll create this effect of like, I've already searched this place for everything and I'm still messing up. It must be a problem with just like me. Am I even supposed to be doing this anymore? Like, I thought I knew everything about this, which obviously we never know everything about anything. But I've been there before so many times. And that's the biggest thing I think God calls us to sacrifice, is our understanding. And not only our understanding in how we see ourselves operating in the thing He calls us to, but our understanding of, perhaps our understanding of Him, Himself, and what actually is good or bad. Because a lot of people would read this story of Abraham and God calling him to sacrifice his son Isaac and just think, that's disgusting. Like, it's really weird for God to do that. Like, that doesn't seem proper and nice at all. I don't know anybody that would probably suggest doing that. If you were leading someone somewhere as a leader, would you ask them to sacrifice everything? Like everything, to the point of like their child? That's really harsh, right? But it's like Abraham obeyed right away. Like the next verse after God tells him that, early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 servants and his son Isaac. And it's like a sad story because Isaac's all like, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And that's an incredible depiction. Now, I've always heard that Abraham just had faith that God would resurrect him. And I should look that up, like where that is, because sometimes I thought, what if Abraham didn't believe that? What if he was just like, God just wants me to sacrifice him? I guess that's what's going to happen. Did Abraham believe that God would resurrect Isaac? Hebrews 11. So it says there, by faith, Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. Gotcha. That's Hebrews 11:19. So I guess that is true. When you go through these actions, like the person you were before you took them, these like extreme measures that God calls us to, that person dies in order to bring about the new person, because you become someone different when you start doing things that don't make sense in accordance to like your current perception of things, right? Your faith grows exponentially and immeasurably. And all them days and nights when you ask yourself, like, am I just absolutely insane? Like, I'm still doing this and nothing's going on. Or what I believe God promised me is not, there's no inkling of it. Which, even take the spiritual aspect out of it, you ever hear anything from like billionaires or whatnot, they talk about how there's going to be years when, I actually just seen a thing where Alex Hormozy was talking, and he was like, the thing about starting your own business or becoming really successful is there's going to be years where you have people around you where those aren't really the people that you should be hanging out with in accordance to the habits that you're trying to build, but you're not like in the circles or successful enough yet, and you haven't been put on the places where the people that really have the drive that you are striving for now are at yet. So you're like in this in between area, and you can sometimes be there for years and just work for years without seeing anything. And that's reflected in the Bible too, where people do things for a long time that seem to be illogical, and it seems to be stupid. Like, it doesn't, think about how long Abraham built his relationship with Isaac up to this point, and being a great dad and whatnot, I'm sure he was. And then he just straight was told to sacrifice him, and next morning he gets up, saddles his donkey, and he's like, okay, that's crazy. I can't. That's such faith that it's almost unfathomable to think about. That's wild. I have a hard time following through on stuff week by week when I have like a rough day and the next morning and stuff gets all weird and things are thrown off. And it's so crazy how different you feel after you get done doing something that you know you should and you don't want to, and then you go ahead and follow through with it anyway. It's like you know you made the right choice. And then if you don't end up doing it and giving in to your feelings, and you feel worse usually. And it's also more complicated than that, because sometimes when you're feeling like you shouldn't do something, it's because you need to take a break, right? And we're called to rest, right, in the Bible. So it's this like constant dance that we have to have with God. And the only way I think we can really properly go about it is by having a relationship with Him, which I believe that is the whole reason we exist anyway. That's why God created us, was to have a relationship with us. And so it makes sense to me that that's like the fulcrum that the whole machine relies upon to work. And there's days and weeks where nothing feels like things are going the way they should. And I think the longer those spans of time are in your journey, kind of is a testament to where you are in your faith. I think there's a correlation there. Because usually well, you always hear that like greater the calling, the greater the difficulties are, the challenges that stand in the way, or the longer periods of isolation you go into and whatnot, which makes sense because the longer I have to wait for stuff, usually it is harder. And I know, like just now in my life, if I was doing the things I'm doing now, 2 years ago or even a year ago, I wouldn't be able to handle it at all, at all, which shows that you're growing. And someone that, like myself, that's super critical of myself, like I always tell people, no one can ever be as critical of me as I am of myself ever, which is good and bad. I know the periods I have to wait for things that I feel God calling me to, the longer they are, the greater the significance of the promised land He's bringing me to. I believe that's true. I think pretty much 90% of people quit in the middle, and I can see why, because it seems pretty nice to quit once in a while. It you have a lot more company when you quit. You can relate to a lot more people when you quit. And people will be there with open arms waiting to catch you when you quit. And they will love on you when you quit. Because, well, a lot of people don't even have the gall to really start in the first place. And so it's this like constant dance of, do I persist in the human loneliness and the pain and suffering, which is building my obedience and everything else that God's calling me to, in order to get to where God's calling me to? Or do I quit and then revert back to maybe having a greater social life, but the relationships there aren't going to be as great for one, but they will at least be active in an earthly standard, right? Because right now, just in my life, I feel like my faith in God and my relationship with Him is greater than it's ever been in my entire existence. Like, that's for sure. But when it comes to my human relationships, like just people in the world, I think they're better than they were like a couple months ago. But if you would compare this now to when I was having a bunch of bad habits where I was like partying all the time when I was like really young, or uh, filling my day with activities that don't really build habits and traits that are going to bring a huge, great thing in my life, I hung out with a lot more people. And you could argue that I was happier. And I could argue with myself that I was happier. I felt happier, happier. And it has a big pull sometimes, right? When you're going down or when God calls you to sacrifice something. And it's like, this feels like trash. And everything seemed to be better back when I wasn't striving for something great. Because arguably, the standard for being mentally healthy, if people were to look at that from the outside in, the past social life you have when you're doing all these things, just living and not really striving for anything greater, which isn't always the case. but I'm just saying it for this example. You could say that, like, I was healthier then, like, mentally. In this story here of Abraham getting called to sacrifice his son and just going through it, it's so relatable for me, wherein I feel like God calls us to sacrifice the things that make us comfortable and feel good in life in order to strive for things that are beyond our understanding. And those are the things that really change the world. And those are the things that really change people. No one really ever sees the journey to get there, or like the tears and the blood and the sweat it takes to get there. And people don't really like to talk about it either at all. They don't. And it's messy. And you usually make mistakes during that period too. Like we've seen Abraham here make mistakes where his wife suggested something which probably came from a good place, and he knocks up the maidservant for his son. And that's not the way that God wanted him to bring that about. And God still takes care of it and takes care of Abraham and brings about what God has promised him. But that wasn't the exact way. But Abraham still grows through it. God still uses it to grow Abraham's faith, and he does honor him in the end. And it's good for me to see that the days where I'm just like, am I losing my mind? Am I doing all this for naught? But we serve a God that is greater than everything, and he sees our trials and pain, and he'll bring us through it regardless. And just seeing that he has asked people in the Bible to do stuff that seems absolutely heinous and crazy, and he stopped him before he killed his son. Like that brings me comfort in my journey, at least. And it shows that if you can strive towards the truth, which is God, everything will be all right. And it will be the greatest way that you can go about life. And you'll be called to do things that are painful, emotionally and psychologically, physically, spiritually. And it will test you in ways you've never been tested before, and relationally. And God always comes around and brings it back. There's always this like cyclical pattern of doing good in my life, of like doing good, doing good, doing good. And then I like kind of crash for a day or two, and then I do good again. And those days that I crash are really hard, actually. Sometimes I think that those are like testing days, or sometimes I just think they're originating from mistakes that I have, or sometimes I think it's the enemy attacking me or whatever. So I don't really know, and we don't know. But the more of those days that I get through, the more change that happens in me. And I at least know now my perspective of things is different than it was 2 years ago. So I know stuff is happening from those times of darkness, I would say, or questions. And as long as my perception is changing in a way where I can see it bringing about productive thought patterns in regards to furthering God's kingdom, which is my main priority on earth, and pleasing Him, as long as I see my thought patterns seem to be a proponent to that, I think that's amazing. It's always a good thing. It may not feel good, and I may not have many with me to, you know, shake their hands at the end or whatever, or high five me during it. And that's so crazy to think about because it's like the more you do things that everyone else does, the bigger your social circles will be. But at the same time, they're like really shallow ponds rather than like deep reservoirs of love, it seems like. Which I don't know if that's 100% true. I'd have to think about that for a while because people that I know when I wasn't like having these visions I have now in the relationship I have with God now, like I said, when I had tons of friends, it's like I felt tons of love all the time. All the time. I mean, yes, some of it was definitely linked to the activities we were doing together, just as any relationships kind of are. And when that activity stopped, those relationships changed. But there was still a lot of love there. There was. And it felt great. Now, wasn't really causing change in either of us, any of the people involved, but we cared about each other, right? And it's interesting to me how the more you go for something that's absolutely huge and like really challenging to attain, the less you relate to everyone around you. And it brings about this like emotional and relational suffering. So it feels far worse in that like in between moment between leaving your old relationships and going to wherever you're going. I think that's why God told Abraham, go to a land where I will show you, leave your homeland and everything. It's really hard to leave. And it's really hard to enact the sacrifices that God calls us to. But the sacrifice of my own understanding that's probably the biggest thing that keeps me going. Because if I went logically off what I really think I should do a lot of the times, my life would look completely different. And that's not just like an A-B interaction or like a step 1, 2, 3 process. It's not procedural like that because God does give us like gifts of wisdom and whatnot. So we should trust our own understanding. But there's tons of stories in the Bible where God calls his people to do things that are beyond that. And I also think that is how the wisdom also grows. It's just the constant prioritization of him being at like the pinnacle of our belief hierarchy, like I was talking about in like, I don't know how many videos ago, a couple of videos ago, when I was speaking on if the pursuit of pleasure, if pleasure is at the top of our like value hierarchy, there's a paradoxical effects because you can't gain this same amount of pleasure from doing activities over and over again. Right. And everyone knows this is the 50th time you do something doesn't feel as good as the first time. And therefore, me speaking about like the sacrifice of my understanding is what keeps me going. It's just the belief that God is greater than anything going on down here and that no matter what I'm experiencing or feeling, Like, it's all going to be okay because he's going to take care of it all in the end. And he has, and I see here in Genesis 22 where he's calling people that are major characters in the Bible to do things that don't make sense and don't feel good, right? It can't feel good to be asked to sacrifice your only son. It can't feel good for God to tell you that this is your only son and that the one you had with Hagar wasn't a true son. That can't feel good, right? God knows that. And God knows that that's what it takes in order to build us. That's why that Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8, where it says Jesus learned obedience. Son though he was, Jesus learned obedience through his suffering. And sometimes we just got to hang on and keep going. And yesterday when I was recording, I straight got on here and I was just like, it was terrible. I did want to take it down. I still want to take it down because I don't feel like it was good. I feel like it was bad. But I have faith in God where I don't want to cover up my mistakes and like my bad recordings on here or anything. I think it's stupid. For one, it gives you evidence to like cross-reference when you look at your future and as you get better, right? And for two, it's God has purpose in your growth, right? God has purpose in the challenges. I'm sure God had purpose in the tears that Abraham shed here when he was called to sacrifice his son. I'm guessing that he cried. And like I didn't want to take it down yesterday. And it was like I didn't want to take it down today or yesterday, right? And that's also a testament to how God has grown me because there is a day I have taken down posts before that I put up because they look terrible. And that was before I really started doing this like YouTube live thing where I really just wanted to be super transparent in a sense where I don't want to edit anything. One, for the sake of time. And for two, it just meshes with my personality more. Like I'm really transparent. And something I've been thinking about is some people say that you shouldn't share everything, but which I would say, sure, I agree with that. There are times when you need to be strategic with what you're saying and sharing with people. But at the same time, let's say, for instance, yesterday when I was serving at church and that one of the leaders there, they asked me how I was doing, and I was like, I'm doing good, but I'm just kind of having a rough day today or whatever. I don't want to be here. Like I don't want to be here right now. You sharing things like that with people that probably wouldn't be deemed as something that you should share with them, or maybe it's too much. I look at that as like, I don't know what everyone knows around me. And so me sharing things about my struggles in life will open up and increase the opportunity percentage, the chances that I can retain knowledge from someone else and learn something from someone else that they know about something that I don't. So if I don't ever speak about what I'm struggling with, I'm hampering my chances of God using other people to bring wisdom into my life, right? And the only reason I would be constricting that is because I care what other people think about me more than I care about getting to the place that God wants me to go. And that's very hard because some callings in life, reputation in ways matters. It's not inconsequential, but you should care about the promised land more. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense? There are a couple people in here. Good morning, by the way. And man, I deal with that a lot. Where it's like, well, I'm better just laying it all out there and dealing with the ramifications because at least at that point I can come away from this having a building my knowledge base from something perhaps maybe they know. And yeah, you have to be careful with that sometimes because you'll start painting pictures of yourself on like bad days that aren't really congruent with who you really are as a person. Like everyone knows you can have a bad day and be mean to someone when you're not really a mean person on the average day. But still, I think I think it's a great positive attribute to be more transparent than not. Because yeah, it's how I learn. It's like, and it's a way that you can lower yourself below others. Like you don't think you're better than anybody, which I don't. And so I believe I can learn something from anybody, even if it isn't in a way that plays itself out like they're doing something better than me or in a way that should be done. You can also look on people and learn from their mistakes in a way, right? Or learn from their understanding of something. Because the way that some people do things obviously isn't the best for you and all that, right? And I just thank God that, man, He cares enough about us to put us through things that challenge us and grow us, even if it's beyond our understanding and causes us turmoil and pain. I think where it all goes is awry is when we start leaving the relationship with Him and just start dealing with the pain ourselves. That's when everything gets twisted and contorted, I think. And so I'm just going to end today with saying I would encourage you to, when you feel uncomfortable or feel that there are days, am I going crazy? Maybe. I would give an argument where you kind of have to be a little bit crazy to do some of these things. And crazy in a sense where you are outside of the human understanding and accepted normalcy of things, right? So yeah, you probably are going a little crazy and it's okay. God will take care of you and just rely on the relationship with Him. It's in the Bible. Ask Him for reasoning and clarification on things. There are tons of stories in the Bible where He calls people to do really wild things that are not okay by culture at all. So take comfort in knowing that God isn't beyond asking people to do wild things and enduring suffering and challenges in life in order to bring about the promises He gives us or we perceive as Him giving us. And with that, I'm going to get out of here. It's 9:38 now. And for those that are in the chat, you too, I hope you have a great rest of your day. And everyone else, anyone who listens to this, I love you. And leave a comment if you want. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. I still don't like saying that. But I hope you have a great rest of your day. And just know that no one out there is absent from the struggles. We just, we're all dealing with it in the way that God has us dealing with it right now. And some of us that don't believe in God, they're just dealing with it in whatever way they perceive is best. Or, I mean, hell, you can get to a place where you don't even care what you perceive best anymore. That's really terrible. But if you've been there, you've been there. And just keep going. I'll be back on Friday at 8 a.m. And I love you. God loves you. He won't let you down. He will always be there for you. Don't worry what other people think. Don't worry about fitting in. You just need to worry about fitting in with God and getting close to Him. Go. That's why I'm like such a big proponent this season on like going straight to the source, like the Bible and God Himself rather than people. Because people's understanding is based on their interactions in the world. When God has a plan for you that is specifically designed for you, and he knows the things that are challenging you more than anyone. Anyone. And he loves you more than anyone. And it's a different sort of love. With that, I'm going to get out of here. I love you, and I thank you so much for watching. And you have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you Friday. Later on.